Alrighty, good evening and welcome to Nikos. This is Jonathan Albin, your host, and today we are in session zero Chronicles for another species and another wave of interesting information that you'll need to be able to play the Nikos RPG in one of my sessions. Now, granted, the process of a session zero is generally done the first week before an adventure starts, and it gives a game master a single session to work out the final details of what particularly is going on with the players and make sure that he's got everything that's necessary to get going on the game. In this case, the world of Nikos has a 12,000 year heritage. That's 48 plus years of play experience every week, and it's just insane number of hours that we participated in this, and so there's a lot of information to go over. So I determined that a better way to do it was give you the information right here. So today, on episode 3, we're going to be looking at actually a group of species on Nikos known as the Morrowind. I'll explain why we're not going into each individual species of them, but I think you'll get the gist as we go along. We're going to talk about the species name, where they came from, what the culture is, where they are found within the realms of Nikos, and some examples of who they are. So if you're up with it, why don't we go ahead and get started, shall we? All right. So the species name Morrowind is derived from the progenitor of the species. In this case, all of the members of the Morrowind species were culturally elevated from being animals to being mortals. In other words, in the world of Nikos, two scientists, fundamentally two magi, one named Morrow and the other one named Bathra, worked together to create an elevation process that could uplift species to sentience. And as they did so, they did it for all of that animal kind. And so there are literally dozens that are available. So, in the case of the Morrowind, who were primarily focused on by the Magi Morrow, they are the warm-blooded creatures that have been elevated. And when I say elevated, we are speaking of the development of bipedal walking methodology, the use of their forepaws or hands, if you will, as opposable tools, and they were elevated to equal consciousness and sentience with other members of the mortals. As mortals, we're referring to those species that were theoretically, or at least believe themselves to be uh, possessors of souls, and we'll go more into that in the culture in the future episodes. But today, let's talk about the Morrowind. Well, the Morrowind are literally any animal form that you can think of on Earth, and in the case of the realm of Nikos, they are um, elevated or given equivalency with humanity. And so there are persons that are of the cat species on Nikos. They're collectively known as the feline. If there are, for example, a an elephant that has been elevated, it goes by the colloquial group name of the packmen, and that's of course short for pachyderm men. But the variety of these species are so wide as to take way too long to go into. So there are bird people and every kind of four-footed animal that now is able to walk on two, so to speak. And these species all operate collectively and independently in basically every clime of the world of Nikos, from the jungles to the Arctic. There are members of the sect gen population um, that are Morrowind. And the term SecGen, which is uses quite a bit on Nikos, is a collective term for all of those of this uplifted status. So all of the warm and cold-blooded beings collectively are known as the SecGen, which is short for the second Genesis. And it refers to a period of time just before the ninth iteration, or actually, yes, just before the ninth iteration, where these scientists did their work. These magi gave to the world this capacity for sentience. We're going to talk about their two capitals at this point. The two of the nations of Nikos are predominantly second Genesis nations, and they surprisingly do not break down in the line that you would think. They do not split down the line cold blood and warm blood. As a matter of fact, the SecGen collectively work together and don't have any of the challenges or differences that we have in the human population, it seems. But the nations of Swarthir and Neomoria are their homes and capitals. Swarthir is a desert climb, high temperature, low humidity, and large, wide-ranging grasslands and such. Neomoria is, ironically, a bit south of Swarthir and west, and yet is a more temperate climb, and its geography is forested area. And the two nations have, at this point, never engaged in any diplomatic relations because they are literally continents apart, and both of them have had to fight for their independence in the last iteration, and therefore are only now starting to resurge into the ninth iteration free of any of those conflicts. The populations vary from season to season and from time to time, as both of them are well noted for their trade and affability, and people will travel half a continent to come and visit the miracles of the Swarthir mystics and to indulge in the Neomorian technologies. These kingdoms have embraced the uniqueness of their status and are constantly working to negotiate with the other nations and species of Nikos to create a more amicable place to live. When we speak of places of greatness for the SecGen, the only one that really can come to mind, because of their short historical relevance, is, of course, the citadel at Mammoth. And Mammoth is a facility where the majority of Morrow's work was done. And in the citadel of Mammoth are quite a few areas that kind of defy description, in that are apparently cells and laboratories and facilities for not only creating the process by which the uplifting can occur, but also places where the occasional errors and abominations that were created were housed. And so it is at this point, almost 1,500 years since the origin of the species. It has become an archaeological and scientific place of study and research. And their openness about these kind of things concerning their past has been very relevant for those who study history and look into the origin of other species, so they can try to see any parallels that might be. When we speak of the SecGen in the early part, or rather the later part of the 8th iteration two particular characters have come to the fore in reference to their people. In the case of the Morrowind, the two characters are Tondaru and the Uplifted Queen. Now, Tondaru, by his species, is a giant red panda, standing nearly 6 feet tall, covered with red and bronzy colored fur. And of particular note, Tondaru is an established and ordained, if you will, knight of the realm. And one of his greatest loves is jousting. And if you can imagine a close to 400-pound bear riding on a monstrous and well-trained warhorse by the name of Furioso, and what that must do to the minds of the other jousters is, almost comical. The thought of this bear-like being riding its steed towards you, barreling down with all of that mass, it's got to be terrifying. He has a record of 9-1, and he actually has officially had it reclaimed as 9-0, as it was found that his opponent had actually cheated during the bout, and so it's actually 9-0, but the official is still written down as 9-1. Now, he is a sworn knight of the realms and works in particular as the champion of the Uplifted Queen, Catelyn Noir. And Catelyn is a most peculiar creature. She is a Phaline, a sec-gen, who is a clouded leopard, but with a black sheen, and so therefore her spots on the coat do show up as two different colors if you look at it in the right eye and with the right light. But the Uplifted Queen, ironically, had a very checkered and, shall we say, spotted past, as she initially roamed the streets as an orphan in the arguably one of the richest cities in the world of Nykos, Tenerife. And when she and Tondaru found each other and started traveling together, it was one of those, I guess you'd say, hate-love relationships. When they first got together and were traveling, they despised one another. The two of them have been co-travelers for almost 10 years in game's time, and have had a great many adventures and have traveled a goodly portion of at least the western continent of Grolin. I didn't specify it, by the way. The Citadel of Mammoth is in the lower area of the country of Neomoria and near the city itself, and that is found on the western continent of Grolin. In the history of Nykos, there's been one major war for the sec-gen to be involved with on each of the continents. In the case today, we're going to be talking about the battle for Neomoria, and that occurs around this city of which I spoke a moment ago, in the middle part of the 8th iteration. There was an attempt by the Primus Eldrin to exert their power on a new continent, as they had not been involved in Grolin for the better part of 3 iterations. And in that city, in the possibly the worst of times for them, a battle force of the Eldrin had arrived outside of the city, and every person in the city, from children to adults, men and women, and everything in between, mounted a defense of the city the likes of which had not been seen in nearly 3,000 years. And though the battle took 4 days, the amount of devastation that it wreaked upon the city itself has now taken close to 20 years to repair and resolve. And even to this point, there are moves within the global culture of Nikos to attempt to force the Primus to pay reparations. But that has not yet been resolved, and this conflict in the area of Neomoria will be described a little bit later in more full detail. But I needed to get out that portion, that battle for Neomoria, did define the sec-gen population for the remainder of the 8th iteration and has prepared them for the 9th. Most notable in the history of the sec-gen population, and in particular the Morrowind, was the arrival of the Pony Emperor. And in the 7th iteration, actually in the 6th iteration, the champions of that era, when they had completed their advancement and expanded their control and dominion over the entire world of Nikos, they determined that it was not right for humanity to lead itself, because it seemed inevitably that the mortals would lead themselves to destruction, as they had time and again. So, good King Ash, the first king of Nikos and the leader of the champions of that era, one of the few that did not actually develop a team name, ironically, chose instead to create a document that would preserve human advancement and control its overreaches by instituting a emperor of non-human stock. And at the time, the document was considered to be laughable, and many of the nations ignored it. But in particular, the area of Neomoria did not only accept it, but did choose the particular Pony Emperor, and by maintaining its bloodline over the iterations, had, by the time of the by the time of the 6th iteration, had no 8th iteration. By the time of the 8th iteration, gotta get my story straight, had bred the line to the specifics of a horse breed that was intellectual beyond any other. It could calculate, it could communicate through stamps and snorts and the like. And one of the final prophecies from the 2nd iteration that promised a new Genesis, or a new creation, focused on this particular Pony Emperor, and in his lifespan, they finally breached the barrier and completed the transition to create the sec-gen. Now, ironically, despite the intellect of the Pony Emperor, they did not actually utilize the process on the equine. So horses are one of the few beings on Nikos of an animal nature that don't have a sec-gen analog. And that is because the prophecy warned that the world would change when the Pony Emperor found his voice. And in the descendancy of that Pony Emperor, whose name was, I believe, Bucephalus, named after a famous horse, the years of Terran occupation, this Pony Emperor, his daughter, his sired female, was Ivy, and in her lifespan, she suddenly was able to talk and speak and carry on information. And it was discovered that the horses had a mystery tied to the area of the old country that had been where Neomoria had risen, called Moria. And in that city of Moria, the horses had at one point been altered. And I'm not going any farther than that. But the point is that Ivy, finally, when she spoke, she proclaimed the city a safe haven for all second Genesis beings, and in particular of the Morrowind, as it appears that Ivy had a memory that had been passed down from horse to horse throughout the period, suggesting that they were aware of Morrow's work 3 generations before it ever happened, three iterations before it even happened. And so this empress, the last pony emperor, liberated the city, converted it to a trade center and a mecca for the SecGen, and was perhaps the most instrumental non-sentient being to ever arrive at sentience on Nycos. Well, I've talked about them, so I need to talk a little bit about the impact of the past on the past iterations by the SecGen. Now, since the SecGen have only existed fundamentally for the 7th and 8th iterations, having been uplifted only that recently, it's ironic that there are implications that go far into the past. First of which is that one of the most adventurous groups within the SecGen population are a group known as the Towermox. And the Towermox are, if you will, minotaurs. They are beings that are half bovine and half human. And there are archaeological discoveries going back as far as the first iteration, suggesting that the Towermox had made their mark and lived in those times and were recorded into myth and legacy that far back. Many people look at those stories and claim that it's just reverse interpretation, that you're seeing artifacts that have glyphs and images that suggest Towermox, but that perhaps they only fed the fuel for Maro and Bathra to make the attempt, and therefore aren't legitimate evidence of the species being in existence that far back. But in particular, there is the country of Landoria that has only recently been disinterred from the earth in the nation of Tirkun, that has discovered a massive multi-level labyrinth that lay specifically where there had been a prophetic story talking of a minotaur that threatened and raged over the area, and that the multi-layered labyrinth was actually built around it to contain it. And only in the last few months did somebody actually excavate what appear to be the remains of just such a minotaur, such a Tarmakian. So if that is true, then in some fashion, in some period of time in the past, the SecGen have found a way to travel temporally backwards through time, and have therefore influenced the world in iterations going back all the way. Obviously, with the resurgence of the Swarthir after their recent civil war and the advancements made in technology by the Neomorians, the 9th iteration is going to be influenced greatly by the SecGen of both types, and in particular the Morrowind in the areas of survival and exploration. They have the insatiable curiosity of a cat, the dogged determination of, well, a dog. They have a burning need to explore and adventure, and since they include not only the traditional warm-blooded species, but also the avians, which are bird-derived, the Swarthir are the Morrowind are perfectly suited to expand and even provide opportunities for lesser physically aggressive species to expand their horizons. Now, as I've said, throughout the world of Nikos, the Sec Gen have made their mark, and therefore any player who takes on the role of a Sec Gen is going to be able to fit a wide array of environs and even indeed career types. So if you choose to play a Morrowind, you get to pick your specific species. From that species, you get to pick 6 marks of that species, those identifying characteristics that are only unique to that species. Then you also get to choose your your state, your ways, your place, and all the other things that go into character building. Speaking of that, tomorrow in midday, I will be doing a special Nikos Session 0 Chronicles that will be a full playthrough, or the full character progression playthrough of NycosRPG to show how to build a character for the game. And we'll also be providing another opportunity to receive a free copy of the NycosRPG just simply by attending that session. So I will be putting a flag for that on the end of this video. And if you like what you've seen, make sure you click the subscribe button and the follow button on Twitch, and click the bell so that you can get the notifications, so you'll know when every new video is made. And if you would, I'd greatly appreciate any comments you have about the show, so that the audience will know that there is interest in what I'm presenting. In the meantime, I want to thank you for viewing this. Make sure you check out my YouTube page at NycosRPG on YouTube. And I also have, if you're interested, a Patreon account for those that want to become part of the process, patreon.com/Nykos, NYCOS. Alrighty, that will wrap it up for me. I'm Jonathan Albin, the creator of the NycosRPG, and this has been the Session 0 Chronicles, Episode 3. Hope to see you again next time. Bye.